Welcome to the Exponential Potential Podcast. Ignite your potential and thrive in times of great change with your hosts, Jennifer Evans and Claire Oatway. Join us and feel uplifted and inspired as we share with you powerful and insightful stories, top tips and tools with our expert guests on an array of topics covering all aspects of life and business, designed to ignite your potential and help you thrive in times of great change.
Okay. Recording in progress. Got it.
Hello, and welcome to Exponential Potential, where each episode we explore a different element of personal growth. There is so much happening in the world right now. There's so much change and real positive momentum, and not everybody feels a part of it. But you can see everybody should have an opportunity to thrive in this world. And so each episode, we're interviewing different guests who are looking at different angles of spirituality or growth or leadership, and just sharing their wisdom about how us humans can thrive in this exponential change environment. And I am delighted today to be talking with John Rice, and we met a couple of years ago. It's flown by, and we both have a deep interest in coaching and resilience. But I'll let you describe what you do best, John. Hi.
Okay. Thanks, Claire. It was a lovely introduction. I feel exactly the same as you. The world is really changing now. We've been through pandemic. Unfortunately, we're now going through a period of unsettled times in Europe. And I have noticed in my coaching that mental resilience, or as I like to call it, mental fitness, is really important for people. I think most people now understand that being physically fit, will enable you to do more. And I'm kind of drawing an analogy there with my clients, saying that if you're mentally fit, I've mentioned before, I don't often use the term mental health because it does have some negative connotations. It shouldn't, but it still does, especially in the workplace. So I think talking about mental fitness or mental resilience to clients is a really important thing to do, and I help them over at least a 6-week period to build their mental fitness and resilience.
And let's just dive into that a little bit more, kind of what type of exercises do you do? Because when you describe it as fitness, my head automatically goes to kind of physical fitness and, and movement.
I think, again, Claire, it's really interesting to think of the brain as a muscle, and that brain needs working to increase its muscle power. Now, I strongly believe we have, all of us have our ups and downs, and I think what mental resilience does is enabling you to come back from the darker thoughts or the unhelpful thoughts. That might be stress, it might be anger, to a more balanced view of the world, because how we perceive the world is how we show up in the world. So if you're showing up and you're not feeling great and you've got lots of things on your mind, you're not going to perform at your best either at work or at home. So what this program does, it concentrates on finding out initially what we call your top saboteurs. It's through a program that was devised by Shazad Charmaine, and it's called Positive Intelligence. And he has done a wonderful program for coaches that take coaches through the program, and then we become accredited, and then we can take our clients through. So through a 6-week program, they would really notice a difference in how their saboteurs are showing up. I mean, if you'd like a couple of examples, all of us in the world have the judge as our major saboteur. So we judge ourselves, we're hard on ourselves when things aren't going well. If we judge ourselves, we are, whether we have, can help it or not, we also then judge others. Why is that person not working at their best? That's probably a very polite way of describing how we judge others. And we judge situations. We say, why am I in this? Why am I having to work such long hours? Why can't, things be better? So we work through 6 weeks of fairly intense mental fitness to enable you to get back to that kind of neutral ground, and then work on getting into a more positive state of mind. And it's very simple. I don't say it's easy, but it's a simple process.
And can you give us some examples of the impact that has had, for some of your clients so
Yeah,
far?
absolutely. Some of the interesting people I work with are fairly high up in their organizations. And what I have noticed is that there's a certain healthy cynicism about growing your brain as a muscle. What I like to describe it as is, if you are going down a well-trodden path, and that is your reaction to something. So if you always react in the same way to something, you will take the well-trodden path because your brain has built a neural pathway. But if you ask somebody to think, stop, and pause, and think whether there's another way before they react, that can be really useful. And what I've noticed with everybody actually who's come on my program so far, there's a common theme of people of working as busy executives. So their work-life balance is not often good. They have back-to-back meetings. They are probably in a place where they will be micromanaging in some circumstances. And again, this depends on them as a personality. But I've noticed, I'll give you an example, a guy I'm working with at the moment, he didn't feel that he had what he would call gravitas or leadership qualities within his organization. And he was a micromanager. We talked, we discussed it at length, and we came up with new ways and new plans for him to have a much more inclusive team. And this is what positive intelligence can do for people. And first of all, obviously, it seems obvious, Claire, but even recognizing that you have these challenges is a massive step. Once those have been recognized and the client acknowledges that, they'd like to change, that is where the beauty of coaching and positive intelligence takes place. So this guy now, after only 6 weeks, he has actually written an inclusive plan for his team. I always encourage leaders to engage with their team to create agreements rather than either side having expectations of each other. So, agreements are far more powerful and they can be changed as time goes on. But now he has a cohesive project team. He's in charge of a lot of different project managers, and he has seen real results almost immediately with a different approach.
Yes, that's fantastic. And the way that you describe, this well-trodden path, I really can understand it as somebody who was a rapid riser within a corporate environment. You feel like you develop quite a narrow set of skills and then keep pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and pushing them, but don't always adapt to a changing environment, or as we started at the beginning of the call, a changing world. You sort of it's a strength that you've been rewarded for over and over again and recognized for, and you do almost unconsciously apply that same approach. Is that something that you find?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people have what they would call perhaps a comfortable management style, but comfortable may not be the way to go. Just because it makes you feel okay, it may not make others, and get the best from people. So, we work on that throughout the 6 weeks and beyond if necessary. And I think when you begin to really ask people about leadership and what it means to them, and offer perhaps an alternative way of looking at leadership, it doesn't always have to be from the front. You could be side by side with somebody. I think great leaders not only inspire their team, but they also know how to adapt to different members' styles within their team. And it's recognizing that there's not a leadership style that fits everybody. And that is often surprisingly quite a revelation for some of the leaders. Well, I've always done it this way, and I think it works. And I think we can see increases in all kinds of key performance indicators within the team once even one member has been through the mental resilience program. It is actually designed for teams, Claire, as well. So, what is really good fun for me is taking a whole team through a 6-week program, because it's almost, getting all the cards out on the table with the team, and, they take an assessment, which is very simple and quite fun. But then they can start to discuss, what their saboteur tendencies are. Are they an avoider? Are they a people pleaser? Are they a controller? And all of these, what we might call more negative sides to our character, can be worked on. And this is, again, Claire, I like you brought it up again. This is where we can build new neural pathways. And what I love about the mental resilience program is that I'm a factual person too. I would probably be cynical if somebody said, "Oh, we can change the way you think and how you show up in the world in 6 weeks." But it is possible, and it has been shown, on MRI scans, that areas of the brain actually change in that time.
It's just phenomenal. And when you were discussing some of the saboteurs there around the avoider, around the controller, I can see how that wouldn't just be within a workplace environment. Many of the examples here we've given our workplace environments. Does the same apply everywhere else?
Absolutely. And the beauty of it, I'll mention 2 things, Claire. If you work on your top 1 or 2 saboteur tendencies, and it's important that we differentiate there, that people have these tendencies or characteristics. We never say Joe Bloggs is an avoider or he's a controller. He has those tendencies. And, in some ways, many of those saboteurs can be a positive. It's only when they're taken to the extreme that they become problematic. And the other thing I was going to mention, you have to press pause here because I've completely forgotten what I was going to say, but we can edit that bit. I was going to mention as well that the other thing about positive intelligence is that we are always looking for the gift in a situation. So however hard things are or they might seem, there is always a way to look at things differently. And I love this aspect of it, because how we look at the world is how we show up in the world. And there's a wonderful example of a story. Well, it's not a story; it's a true story of a young woman who was in one of the German concentration camps during World War II, and she said, at even age 16, she realized that if she was going to survive this, and of course she didn't know ahead what was coming, but if she was going to survive this, she had to think of things differently. And she said from day one, she saw the guards as the prisoners and that she was free. And it was this thing that she told herself every day that got her through. And you can see, Claire, that other people would have a completely different view of a concentration camp and wouldn't survive. So I'm always intrigued by the way people perceive things, and what coaching can do is help people look at things in a completely different way.
And do you think that's the reason why you do what you do?
There's lots of reasons I do what I do, Claire. I mean, I can give you the from my head side, the logical side, and that is I suffered quite badly from depression in 2017 for various reasons. I've written my story on LinkedIn if anybody wants to read it. It's called Some Things You Don't Know About Me. And what I realized in doing I won't call it deep inner work at that point, but I realized I needed to change things in my life. And it really was about seeing past situations differently. And that's the kind of logical reason that I got into coaching. The more heartfelt side is you've said it right at the beginning. There are so many people in the world now, I believe, that are craving for a different kind of connection. I like to perhaps describe it as people who are wanting to change what they might consider, or society might consider, a default future. A default future might be, you're an executive, within a consultancy, and you pretty much, if you stay for the next 10 years, you know pretty much where you're going to be. You know where the next promotion's coming from. You know what your next job title is likely to be. And, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But people who want something different from that is where I believe coaching can really help. So we look at what you're doing now, what energizes you, what drains you. And it could be, if you are completely open, that the path you're on may not be the path you want to continue walking down. So I think coaching as well is about offering opportunities to people that hadn't seen previously.
Yeah. And when you describe it in that way, it kind of, I remember a book that was written by Vishen Lakhani, and that really turned the idea of goal setting on its head. And just a little, we've been doing goal setting for all of this time, but we're getting it completely wrong. We say my goal is to be, senior executive in marketing, and that's what I want. And actually, we don't spend enough time going, my goal is to be earning well so that I can holiday 3 times a year and see different parts of the world and have freedom in terms of the choices that I make, have some authority and be trusted. And we kind of don't spend enough time really unpacking, because we've got quite a narrow focus on, well, it's that. And I think sometimes when you explore what the extra benefits are, then you start to see, that there are many more options.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I love that idea of perhaps, the blinkers or the focus lens. That can be really important in, detailed work. But I think we can all be carried along by this default path. And, our world, for most people, let's face it, is quite narrow. We work, we have a circle of friends, we socialize. And it's not really until you can help someone lift those blinkers that they can see, there's 360 degrees that they could look at. And that is one of the most rewarding things I think that I do. Another lady I'm working with at one of the top consultancies, an example, when I first met her for coaching, she told me that she hardly slept on a Sunday night because, and these are her words, she dreaded going into work the next day. She was very senior. She, from an outside perspective, she looked very successful, lived in a lovely house, 2 great kids, but she just wasn't happy. And what we worked through in that was, in the time I worked with her, was looking at what else is there, what else could she do, what else would she want to do, and she really hadn't even considered those were a possibility. It's not to say that she would actually follow that path and do some of those things that we talked about, but having somebody to talk to who is not invested in you within that company and saying, well, we've spent 18 years getting you to this position, why on earth would you want to leave? Which is pretty much, how she felt. We managed to actually create her a role within this consultancy, and she has presented that to her directors, and they've accepted that. And she's going to be doing something that she's passionate about now, that energizes her, that is going to benefit so many people within the consultancy. And she just didn't even see that as a possibility when we started working together.
And it makes sense from a business perspective, because if you've got somebody who knows, and trust, who knows the business well, knows the market well, you want to get the maximum benefit of that knowledge, that wisdom, don't you? Kind of, I was going to say the benefit of that resource um, from that angle. So from a business sense, why wouldn't you find a way to make that happen? But I guess in some of the bigger organisations, there's often this perception that there's more structure, more expectations that you should fit into the machine of the corporate, as opposed to there are different ways to there's different ways to help the business to thrive as well.
Absolutely. And what I love about this company is they have asked me to coach people within their organization, but as a completely independent person. So, absolutely in-house coaching has its benefits. What they've recognized, though, is that for certain people within an organization, it's going to be much more beneficial and more open for them to talk to somebody outside the organization. And I think that's a really forward-looking organization. It would be, I think it could be quite difficult for somebody to say to a coach within an organization, I hate my job, I just don't know what to do with myself. But an independent coach can really ask any question. If the client's willing to answer it, we can go into all kinds of different places. So, I'm very hopeful that this person will thrive now within an organisation that they had pretty much given up on.
Yeah, and also from working in a number of different large organisations through some complex changes, the other side is that you can see people who aren't happy, who aren't thriving, who have an impact on the broader team, and you can't, in the nicest way, you want to encourage them to find that next look and just go, it's not working, and it's okay. It's okay to move on and to grow. So do you think, we talked about how much the world at large is changing. Do you think kind of this is an exciting time? Do you see it's an exciting time, or is it a difficult time when people are starting to change and adapt? And
it's a great question, Claire. And I can promise you, if you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago that question, I'd have said, the world's a pretty dark place, and a lot of bad things happening. But this is what I love about coaching, and I think if I could describe this, one sentence actually comes to mind, Claire, when you mentioned this subject, and that is, nobody can make you feel in a way that you do not think. It's a fairly simple sentence, but I think when you ask people to consider what that means to them, you'll get a lot of different answers. I mean, I can give you my take on it, and I'll just repeat the question again. Nobody can make you feel in a way that you do not think. So what this says to me is that I am my thoughts, and those can be positive thoughts, they can be negative thoughts, and you cannot stop thought. I think maybe a Buddhist monk may be able to almost shut their brain down, but that is not something that's achievable for most of us. But what we can do is we can start to explore ways that we, whatever works for us, how we can quieten our mind a bit or a lot. And do you know what? Even clearing your mind for a few seconds allows new thoughts to come. So, it's a really interesting subject that I spend quite a lot of time on with my clients. It's not something that you would just brush over for 5 minutes, but in the time that we've got, I think it's a really important thing to think about. And if you then move that sentence on to something else, which would be the length of a feeling is the length of a thought. So if you're thinking good, positive things, you're feeling great, and you'll continue to feel great. But if your perception is of the world that it's not a really very nice place, and that you do have a lot of negative or unhelpful thoughts, that is how you will feel. And going back to what you just said, Claire, in really big and dynamic workplaces, how one person shows up can greatly affect the rest of the team. I mean, imagine, the leader of a company not experiencing positive thought. It will definitely impact the whole of the company.
And I don't know if you're finding this with your clients, but certainly, you know, I've been talking to a range of people, and the world events that are going on, combined with the cost of living rises, are bringing about this underlying fear and anxiety about, how am I going to make ends meet? And I tend to work with smaller businesses where there's much more acute feeling that if you're not earning, then you're not going to be able to pay the bills. And so, what advice would you give to people in that situation? Even just a kind of a small shift that they can make that will help them to step away from that negativity.
I think, Claire, one of the main things that I would say to people is that dwelling on things that are out of your control is an easy thing to do, and it's probably the default human nature to worry about things. I would ask them to think. I've said to you before, you cannot stop thought, but what I would suggest to them is that whatever they might want to try to just get a clearer mind, or to feel calmer, that might just be sitting quietly. It might be listening to a piece of music. I think when you are struggling with negative thoughts, they can become overpowering. And again, this might sound easy, and I'm not saying it is, but the idea is simple: that if you let your negative thoughts go, even if it's just for a few minutes, more positive thoughts will come. And on a practical level, there's a number of really great coaching techniques for people who are experiencing difficulties, financially or with their company. There's a really good, it's almost call it a game that you can play, where it's actually called the yes and game, and it just gets people out of thinking what they normally think. And it probably goes back to what we were talking about near the beginning, that it's very easy, and it doesn't take long for negative or unhelpful thinking to become a normal way of thinking. So the yes and game is, if you're wanting to try and solve a problem within your business, is to sit down with some key people and invite a breadth of people in, and you would ask one person to start off. So if the issue was that fuel prices were crippling a company that was a delivery company, you would start off by saying, well, and it really goes back to the old adage of no idea is a bad idea at the beginning. Nobody should be a filter. All the ideas come. So one idea might be, we need to look at investing more in battery powered cars, so we're not or delivery vehicles. And I realise there's an issue there, because big lorries are too big and heavy, for the current technology for a battery to drive them very far at all. But then someone might say, yes, what I like about that idea is it would reduce our resilience on fuel. And then they would come up with something else to add to it. So their and might be, and I realise that bigger lorries won't be powered by batteries for a while. Why don't we reduce the weight of our lorries so that we can, introduce battery power for them? And this this has two things. It gets people to think in a different way, and it also builds on every person's idea. So rather than perhaps, in a normal brainstorming environment, you say, well, that's silly, we can't do that one. The yes and game means that you pick something from the first idea and build on it. And that can be a really powerful tool to use in a team.
Yes, and I think I can see where that would work quite well with conflict, and sometimes within a team environment, conflict isn't an outright kind of an outright show of emotion. It can sometimes be kind of low level frustration or passive aggression or just here. And so it's just under the surface and not quite enough for a leader to pick up and challenge, but kind of that yes and invites that, I want to say, curiosity, that opportunity to really explore what the other person's saying or what that idea actually is, rather than bring all of the power dynamics and all the biases and all the here goes Doris again to the table. That's a great example, and I think it can probably be used within a kind of interpersonal relationship, whether that be a family or a partnership.
I've seen it used actually, Claire, in family dynamics, and it's a really interesting one. I mean, it takes a bit of practice, and I think, I think a lot of people, going back to your subject of the world not being such a great place at the moment, I think, throughout human history, we've always had conflicts, we've always had problems to deal with, and I think what people tend to want now, and I'm sure it's the age we live in, is a quick fix or a hack. I don't like either of those terms now. I'll be honest, of course, if I see something on social media which says, improve your mood in 7 days with these 3 quick hacks, then, of course that often draws people to look at them. But I think exploring much deeper, and I'm not even talking about, what's happened in a person's past. I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but in the majority of my coaching engagements, we look forward, and of course I can help people with an acceptance of things that have happened in the past. And we all know in our head, Claire, that we can do nothing about yesterday or months or years ago, but some of the things that happened still bother us. And to me, that's another really interesting subject to discuss with clients. So, again, it goes back to, your past. And I say this to my clients: your past doesn't need to define you, but it can if you let it.
Yeah, and similarly, it can if you don't resolve it. I know from personal experience, when I experienced burnout, kind of some of the emotional burdens that were coming through were emotions and reactions from a decade before, kind of completely different life event that I just put under locked away. It's all fine, keep going. And all of a sudden it came through almost like a kind of grief response that just hit me with a double whammy. It was and kind of that was at a time when I wasn't resilient. Yeah, sure.
That's a really interesting point as well, Claire, because I think it helps me and certainly my clients when we talk about this, that your reality is completely different from mine, because we as humans create our own reality, and there's more than 7 billion of us on the planet now. And it always amazes me that, every person will think differently about the situation that they're in, or the things that have happened to them, or what they have to look forward to. And I think looking at and realizing that you do pretty much create your reality. I mean, I know we're lucky, many of us, to to have a roof over our head and food and enough money to do what we want to do with, and that almost then makes space, or should make space, for developing and creating and looking more into ourselves. And I truly believe that that is a great role for coaches and other professionals going forward, is to get people to look at their reality differently if they want to, more positive if they want to. And it's just a fascinating subject when that is talked about, because I think somebody said once, you should never judge what somebody else looks like on the outside, because you don't know how they feel on the inside. And I think that is a really true statement. And when we talk about mental resilience, empathy is a really important part, and emotional intelligence is going to be and should be really important for everybody to maybe not to learn, but at least to be aware of.
Yeah. And so they can, challenge those defaults, so they can create a better default future, I think you said.
Yeah. Or maybe we use a word from the podcast, an exponential future. I believe that's possible for most people. It's possible for everybody who wants it. And I think it's realizing that you want it, and almost the detail of getting there is less important. It's the realization that you want something different.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So listen, how can people get in touch with you?
I'm quite unusual as a coach. I don't have a website. I will let you know, Claire, my email address, and I do actually have a small profile on a coaching platform, which again I'll add that link to you. I think I'm unusual as well, perhaps, in my coaching business. I love social media. I don't often advertise or get any clients through social media. I really believe that building a coaching business is done one conversation at a time. And I love conversations with people. You just know, you hardly ever know where it will lead. I've been surprised by some of my own assumptions with coaching, thinking, initially maybe this person won't work with me, or I'm not sure whether they're seeing things, in a sufficiently different way. But working with them is just brilliant. So yes, I'm a referral and invite only coach, and if anybody has seen this and would like a conversation, I'm sure you'll be kind enough to put the contact details.
We'll certainly put the contact details in the links below. So John, thank you for your time today. It's been you've always brought a calm, solution-focused energy to the room. It's it's a real gift that you hold the space for good conversation to flow, but it always feeds towards a future, and a positive future, and kind of builds up momentum, but not in a giddy way, not in a fake way. It's really quite moving. So thank you so much for your time today, and for everyone tuning into the podcast today. There's some real nuggets in what we've covered today, that you do have so much more control than you think in terms of that future. The idea of the saboteurs, that's how we met, really exploring saboteurs, and I think there's a lot to unpack in that. You could probably fill days worth of conversation around some of those saboteurs, but you're right, understanding and seeing those saboteurs and understanding those tendencies means that you can spot them and start intersecting quite quickly. So I love that you've brought that through, and also one of the really key elements of mental resilience is around owning your thoughts and kind of owning where you are. And then once you own that and you realize that you have the power to shift negatively or positively, it is truly empowering. It truly lifts you, and it can change your day to day, and that can certainly build up to an exponential future.
Yeah.
So John, thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. Lovely to be on.
Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your comments and feedback. And if you've enjoyed it, please click on that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and feel free to share. Join us for our next episode of the Exponential Potential Podcast. Ignite your potential and thrive in times of great change.